In previous videos, we have created and deployed some simple examples of Java Server Faces technology. But before we move on to more complicated implementations, it's important to understand the overall structure and life cycle of a Faces application. Defining this is a little bit tricky though. There are 6 canonical parts of the life cycle of a Faces page, but not all of them will be used in any given situation. So I'll start by describing the 6 phases, but then we'll also go over when and where each phase is actually used. The phases are restore view, apply request values, process validations, update model values, invoke application, and render response. The restore view phase occurs when a request for a Java Server Faces page is made. It consists of building the view of the page, setting up event handlers and validators to components in the view, and putting this view in a Faces context index. If this is the first time that the page has been requested, then an empty view is created and the middle 4 steps are skipped, going straight to render response. If the page has already been created, then the request for the page is called a postback because new information is being added to it. In this case, the life cycle simply advances to the second phase. In the apply request values phase, all of the components in the Java Server Faces page extract their values from the request parameters and then store them. If any events have been queued for this phase, then they are broadcast and can be picked up by interested listeners. Additionally, any components with the immediate attribute are validated, converted, and processed during this phase. Once this phase is complete, all of the components should have their values stored locally, and any events should be queued up and ready to execute. Before the events can be run, though, the process validations page is required to ensure that the values for all of the components are correct. Depending on your implementation, you may have certain requirements for their values as a form of error checking. Strictly speaking, this phase is not necessary if you are absolutely confident that your input will be correct, but it will make your Faces application much more robust. Assuming all the values are valid, the application can move on to the update model values page. Just as the apply request values phase stored the input parameters locally on components, this phase transfers the local values to the server-side components. This double copying technique is used to ensure that potentially false or damaging inputs are properly scrutinized before being applied to the external server. Once all of these values have been updated, the invoke application phase is executed. Whereas previous phases have handled component-specific events, this phase runs application-level events like submitting a form or navigating to another page. From here, the lifecycle can go one of 2 ways. If one of the application-level events linked to another page and that page didn't happen to contain any Java Server Faces components, then the Faces lifecycle is complete. There is no need to display any output from the execution because the new page will replace it. If not, then the lifecycle will move to the final phase, render response. This is the phase where all of the calculations and executions of the previous phases are finally displayed in human understandable form. In this phase, the content of the view is rendered, with each component rendering itself within the JSP container as it traverses the tags on the page. If any errors were encountered in the previous pages, then the original page is displayed. Finally, the state is saved so that the page can be operated on in the future. With this structure in mind, it is much easier to structure Java Server pages so that they execute and render in a consistent manner.